Welcome to another deep dive. This time it's into Palavras Quebradas, uh, which translates to broken words.
Hmm.
You've given us this fascinating collection of poems and letters and introspective prose, all written by this mysterious guy, Pedro Javier Moreira.
Mm.
And he seems to have bounced between Lisbon and Rome.
Yeah.
And there's some debate about whether he was even like a real person or a fictional creation.
It's so interesting.
It's really a literary puzzle.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Well, the source material you've given me was found in a suitcase in Rome, but the writing itself is constantly referencing Portugal, especially Lisbon.
Yeah.
It's almost as if Moreira's heart was split between these two places.
That's interesting because that split seems to mirror a lot of the themes that I'm seeing in this writing.
Yeah.
There's this sense of being torn between longing and love and solace and turmoil.
Yeah.
Where do we even begin to unpack all of this?
Well, you mentioned that there's a question of if Moreira was even real.
Okay.
I think that's a pretty good place to start. Okay.
Have you ever heard of Fernando Pessoa?
I haven't, but I've got all of your notes here. So
Oh, good.
he was a Portuguese writer.
That was.
And he was really famous for creating all these alternate identities.
Yes,
Almost like characters in his head, each with their own unique voice and style.
exactly. And they're called heteronyms.
Heteronyms.
And some scholars believe that Moreira might actually be one of these.
Wow.
Another facet of Pessoa himself.
That just makes the mystery even deeper.
Yeah.
So we're not just like diving into the themes and emotions of these broken words.
Right.
But also trying to figure out if the man behind them even existed outside of the page.
And to make things even more interesting, the last phrase he wrote was in Portuguese.
Huh.
Eles são equilíbrio imperfeito. Sono imperfeito equilíbrio.
Wow.
Which means they are imperfect balance. I am imperfect balance.
Okay, wow. That's pretty powerful. And maybe that's a clue to this recurring theme of imperfect balance.
That you mentioned in the notes. It seems like everything about Moreira's life and work, if it even was his life, is marked by this sense of searching, of trying to find equilibrium.
It definitely comes through in the writing,
Yeah.
especially when it comes to love and longing. Throughout these pieces, we keep encountering this mysterious woman he refers to as Azul. It's unclear if she's real or imagined, but she clearly holds a powerful emotional charge for him.
Yep. There's a lot of heartache in these poems and letters. Like in one poem, he even talks about wanting to meet Azul by chance as if they were strangers, just to relive that thrill of that first encounter.
Oh, wow, yeah. He also writes these incredibly passionate letters to her, pouring out all of his doubts and anxieties. There's one in particular that stands out that's written from Vila Nova de Mil Fontes.
Okay.
It's a beautiful coastal town in Portugal. He described escaping there to try to clear his head. But even the vastness of the ocean can't erase Azul from his thoughts.
That's interesting that you mentioned the ocean, because I noticed in the notes that Moreira frequently turns to nature for solace and inspiration.
Yes.
There are these vivid descriptions of the ocean, the Alfama district in Lisbon, even like simple things, like a poppy flower.
Right. And what's so fascinating is that he doesn't just describe these natural elements. He connects them to his emotional state.
Okay.
For example, in that letter from Vila Nova de Mil Fontes, he talks about the ocean clearing the clouds within him. But then he contrasts this with this overwhelming memory of Azul.
Especially her green dress, right?
Yeah.
There's a mention that it's a recurring image, almost a symbol.
Yes, a motif.
A motif.
It's like a recurring symbol that pops up throughout the work and hints at a deeper meaning.
Okay.
And you're right, that green dress is a powerful motif.
Yeah.
It becomes this tangible representation of his longing for Azul, a reminder of their connection even when they're apart.
And in a way that longing for Azul reflects a broader theme of longing in his work.
Absolutely.
He seems to be yearning for connection, for a sense of wholeness, maybe even a sense of balance.
And it's interesting how he often finds parallels between his inner emotional state and the natural world.
Okay.
There's one line where he compares his heart to a rocky islet, constantly battered by the waves of emotion.
Wow.
It paints such a vivid picture of his internal struggle.
It does, yeah.
Oh.
It does. This reminds me of another interesting aspect of Moreira's work, his reflections on time and memory.
Yeah.
It seems like he's acutely aware of how time changes things, both himself and the places that he holds dear.
You're picking up on some key insights here.
Oh, good.
He has a real fixation on capturing specific moments in time.
Okay.
Like in the poem where he describes the exact second he fell in love with Azul. It's like he's trying to preserve those fleeting moments before they slip away.
But then he also talks about revisiting familiar places, only to find that they no longer feel the same.
Right.
It's as if time has eroded something precious, leaving him with a sense of loss.
That's a feeling I think we can all relate to.
Yeah.
That sense of places holding memories. But those memories changing as we do. But, in addition to nature, love, and time, there's another recurring element in Moreira's writing that I find particularly compelling. His reflections on the act of writing itself.
Yeah. There's a real sense that he sees writing as both a torment and a release. He even has a poem where he describes poetry as something that breaks you open, forcing you to confront your inner darkness.
It's almost as if he views the creative process as this necessary struggle, a way to grapple with his inner turmoil. But there's also a sense of liberation in it, a feeling that by putting his broken words onto the page, he might somehow find a path towards healing or understanding.
And this brings us back to that core question of identity.
Yeah.
If Moreira was just a persona created by Pessoa, does that make his struggles with writing, his longing for Azul, any less real or meaningful?
That's a good question, and it's one that we'll continue to explore as we dive deeper into these broken words. But for now, I think it's important to just sit with the complexity of it all, to allow ourselves to be moved by the raw emotion that bleeds through these fragmented pieces.
I love that. It's like we're being invited to piece together our own understanding of Moreira and his work to find our own meaning within the fragments.
Exactly, and that's what makes this deep dive so fascinating.
Yeah.
We're not just passively consuming information.
Right.
We're actively engaging with it, wrestling with the ideas, and ultimately creating our own interpretations.
Okay, I like that. I like that. So let's dive in.
Let's do it.
So we've started to uncover the layers of Moreira's world. This potential heteronym, his longing for Azul, and his search for solace in nature. But there's this one line from his letter written in Villanova de Mil Fontes that I keep coming back to. He describes seeking refuge there, but even the ocean can't fully clear the clouds within him. What do you think he meant by that?
It's such a powerful image, isn't it? Villanova de Mil Fontes, if you haven't seen it, is this stunning coastal town in Portugal. Imagine dramatic cliffs overlooking the Atlantic. Wild, windswept beaches. You can almost feel the vastness of the ocean trying to wash away his troubles.
But it doesn't quite work, does it? Even in this idyllic setting, surrounded by the beauty of nature, there's still this lingering darkness, this feeling that something is not quite right.
And I think that speaks to the depth of Moreira's internal struggle. He's grappling with some pretty heavy stuff: love, loss, identity, the very nature of existence. It's not the kind of turmoil that a change of scenery can easily erase.
Especially when the memory of Azul, particularly her green dress, seems to haunt him wherever he goes. It's like that dress has become a symbol for everything he longs for, everything that's just out of reach.
Right. It's a powerful motif, that green dress. And it makes me think about something you said earlier about the green dress possibly representing the vibrancy of life that Moreira feels is slipping away.
Yes. I was thinking about how he's so aware of time passing, of moments fading, of things changing. Maybe that green dress represents the vividness of a past that he can't recapture.
Have you ever felt that way yourself? Like you're trying to hold on to a memory, but it keeps slipping through your fingers, becoming less distinct with each passing year?
All the time. I think that's a universal human experience. We long to recapture the intensity of those first loves, those defining moments, but time has a way of softening the edges, blurring the details.
And that's where Moreira's writing gets really interesting. He's not just passively observing the passage of time, he's actively trying to capture it, to preserve those fleeting moments before they vanish completely.
Like in the poem where he describes the precise moment he fell in love with Azul. It's as if he's trying to freeze that moment in time to make it permanent through the act of writing.
Exactly. And, it's interesting that you mentioned the act of writing because Moreira seems to have a pretty complex relationship with it. In one poem, he describes poetry as something that breaks you open, forcing you to confront your inner darkness.
Yes. And in another piece, he talks about writing as a potential cure, a way to grapple with the turmoil of his relationship with Azul. It seems like he sees writing as both a source of pain and a potential path to healing.
It's almost as if he's saying that in order to create something beautiful, something meaningful, you have to be willing to break yourself open, to expose your vulnerabilities, your imperfections.
Yeah, and that brings us back to this recurring theme of imperfect balance.
Yeah.
He seems to be suggesting that it's not about achieving some perfect state of equilibrium, but rather about embracing the messiness, the contradictions, the brokenness of life.
And it makes me think about how often we strive for perfection in our own lives. We want the perfect relationship, the perfect career, the perfect body. But maybe true beauty lies in the imperfections, the quirks, the things that make us unique.
Like those Japanese pottery makers who intentionally incorporate flaws into their work, believing that those imperfections enhance the beauty of the piece.
Exactly. They call it wabi-sabi, the art of finding beauty in imperfection. And I think Moreira's work embodies that same spirit. He's not afraid to show us his cracks, his flaws, his broken words.
It's interesting, though, because while he embraces the imperfection of his own internal world, he seems to find a sense of wholeness, of perfection in the natural world. I keep thinking about his vivid descriptions of the ocean, the Alfama district, those simple poppy flowers.
I see what you mean. It's like he finds a sense of peace and harmony in nature that he struggles to find within himself.
But then there's that line about the ocean not fully clearing the clouds. So maybe even nature can't completely erase the turmoil he feels. Or maybe it's more about finding moments of reprieve, of finding solace in the midst of the storm.
I think you're onto something there. It's not about escaping the darkness altogether, but rather about learning to coexist with it, to find moments of beauty and light even in the midst of struggle.
This reminds me of another piece where he compares himself to a kite caught in a tree, believing it's flying free. It's a powerful image of self-deception, of being trapped by our own illusions. Do you think he's suggesting that we are all, in some way, caught in our own internal struggles?
It's an interesting question. On one hand, he might be suggesting that we all create our own illusions, our own narratives that keep us from seeing the truth of our situation. But on the other hand, maybe he's also saying that even in those moments of feeling trapped, there's still a part of us that longs for freedom, that yearns for something more.
And perhaps that yearning, that longing is what keeps us going, what drives us to keep searching for meaning, for connection, for some semblance of balance in a world that often feels chaotic and unpredictable.
I think that's a beautiful way to put it. It's that longing, that desire for something more, that ultimately makes us human. And it's something that Moreira captures so perfectly in his broken words.
Okay, so we've been on this incredible journey with Pedro Javier Moreira, this potential heteronym, this man who may or may not have even existed, and his collection of Palavras, Quebradas, broken words.
We've explored his longing for Azul, his search for solace in nature, and the way that he captures these fleeting moments of beauty and pain in his writing.
And through it all, this theme of imperfect balance keeps surfacing. It seems to be at the heart of everything he writes. But it's such a complex idea. Where do we even begin to unravel it?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And I don't think there's a simple answer.
Right.
But I think what's so compelling about Moreira's work is that it doesn't shy away from the messiness of life, the contradictions, the uncertainties. He seems to be suggesting that maybe, just maybe, the beauty lies in the imperfection.
I think about that a lot, especially when I'm working on creative projects myself.
Yeah.
You're always striving for that perfection, but
Right.
it's never really attainable, is it? And maybe, like you're saying, that's okay. Maybe the beauty really is in those imperfections.
I think so. And you've mentioned this concept of heteronyms a few times now.
Right.
And I've left a note here reminding us that some scholars believe that Moreira might be one of these fictional identities created by Fernando Pessoa. How does that play into our understanding of imperfect balance, do you think?
Well, the act of creating a heteronym, of assuming a different persona, is itself an exploration of identity. Right. It's about the different facets of the self.
Sure.
Like Pessoa was acknowledging that none of us are singular fixed beings. We contain multitudes, contradictions, and imperfections.
Exactly.
So maybe by creating Moreira, Pessoa was trying to externalize those internal struggles, to give voice to the parts of himself that didn't fit neatly into a single identity.
That's a really insightful observation. It makes me wonder if Moreira's imperfect balance is a reflection of Pessoa's own internal struggles, or if he was crafting a character who embodies a universal human experience.
It's interesting because whether Moreira was real or imagined, his writing still resonates really deeply.
It does.
His longing for Azul, his struggles with the passage of time, his search for solace in nature, these are all themes that speak to the human condition, regardless of who penned the words.
Absolutely. And, it makes me think about how we all construct different versions of ourselves depending on the situation, the people we're with. Are those versions any less authentic than the real us?
That's a great point. It's like we're all made up of these fragmented selves, these broken words, if you will.
Mm.
And maybe the goal isn't to achieve perfect balance or wholeness, but rather to embrace the complexity and contradictions that make us who we are.
I couldn't agree more. And the more I think about it, the more I realize that Moreira's work, even in its fragmented form, offers a profound message of hope. It reminds us that even in brokenness, even in imperfection, there is beauty and truth to be found.
So if you're listening to this and you've ever felt lost or uncertain, like you're searching for balance, but never quite finding it, take comfort in the words of Pedro Javier Moreira. Embrace your broken words, your fragmented self, your imperfect balance.
Because within those imperfections, within those fragments, lies a depth of experience and understanding that is uniquely yours. And that is something truly worth celebrating.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? You've given us this collection of poems, letters, and prose, all bundled together under the title Palavras, Quebradas, which translates to broken words. The writer may or may not have been a real person, but the emotions, the ideas, the struggles they contain are undeniably human.
Moreira, whether real or fictional, compels us to ponder life's big questions. What is identity? What is love? And what is the meaning of it all when we are all fundamentally imperfect beings?
I like what you said earlier about Moreira's work being a profound message of hope,
Yeah.
because it reminds us that it's okay to not have all the answers, to embrace the uncertainty and the imperfections, and maybe even find beauty in those broken places.
Absolutely. I think that's a beautiful takeaway from this deep dive.
What a fantastic deep dive this has been. So much depth to explore in seemingly fragmented pieces, and yet, by the end, we're left feeling a sense of connection, of understanding, and maybe even a touch of hope.
I think that's the magic of literature. It allows us to connect with voices across time and space, to grapple with universal themes, and ultimately to find meaning in our own lives.
Beautifully said. And on that note, we'll leave you to ponder the mysteries of Pedro Javier Moreira and the enduring power of broken words. Until next time, happy reading and keep exploring.